sometimes when people put forward idealist ontologies, they're accused of there being a kind of reverse hard problem. And I think you hold that your version doesn't suffer from that, right?
No, hard problem arises from a kind of dualist thinking, which is forced upon materialists because they can't make sense of experience. So some kind of dualism is forced into them. I don't think there is the opposite problem at all. There is no hard problem of matter for idealism because there is no such a thing as matter defined exclusively in quantitative terms. It doesn't exist. Those quantities are descriptions. They're not the thing in itself. All you have is mind from the get-go. What is matter? Matter is a particular modality of experience, namely perceptual experience. You also have thoughts, you also have emotions, you also have abstract thinking, you have fantasies. Matter is one of these modalities, what presents itself to you on the screen of perception. That's all there is to it. There is only one important problem for analytic idealism, and that is the decomposition problem. How does one mind seemingly become many? That's a legitimate problem. But the way to solve it is through dissociation, which is not even a theoretical invention. And nature is giving us the clues around. People undergo dissociation all the time. Mild forms of dissociation we are all familiar with. We have other words for it. We call it, let's compartmentalize our problems. You know, I'm going through a divorce and my world is falling apart, but I have to go to work. And if I don't do my work well, then I lose my job and then all goes to hell. So I compartmentalize. That's a name for voluntary dissociation. And it works. You manage to dissociate yourself in doing that for at least several minutes at a time. You don't experience your pain, your suffering, no worries. They are still there. There's a part of you that is experiencing that, right? But the executive ego is dissociated from it. So, yeah.
So I guess the only place in the theory that I would see something that maybe would approach a hard problem, or at least a mysterious transition, is between in the kind of conscious states and the extrinsic appearances, like we spoke about before, like why it happens to like metabolism. And we can state that it just does, it has to look like something. But I guess as a scientist, my question would be, in principle, are there methods we could use to gain insight into this relationship? Is it something that's fundamentally mysterious and needs to be stated? Or could there be laws that govern this relationship?
Oh, I thought, of course there are laws. It seems to be so stable. No, we all talk about green and square, and we seem to be we seem to have mutually consistent qualitative states in perception. So of course, certainly there are laws. I think what happened is the following. When the first dissociation happened, in other words, when the first living organism arose out of non-life, abiogenesis, the external experiential states would impinge on the boundary of the inner dissociated life of that organism. In the beginning, it probably was something very, very simple, something akin to, well, it's warm out there or it's cold out there, or it's bright out there or it's dark out there, like one bit, or maybe a grayscale between light and darkness, or warmth and cold, maybe a little grayscale of states. And that was the impingement of the external environment on that dissociative boundary of the organism, which would look like a cell membrane. So when I talk about dissociative boundary, I'm talking about the thing in itself. And when I talk about the membrane, I'm talking about what the thing as it's in itself, how it appears to perception. Yeah, so I'll talk about membranes now because it's more familiar. So I'm not talking about the thing in itself, I'm talking about its appearance now. So simple organism with a membrane, the environment impinged on that membrane, and the organism would register that in an experiential state. Very simple, a little grayscale of warmth or cold and bright or light or darkness. And then guess what? Organisms that would collect more and better information about the surrounding environment stood a better chance to survive and pass on their genes. So nature started refining that dissociative boundary in order to collect more information. Now, this is a tricky problem because you cannot simply mirror the states of the world outside. If you do that, you would dissolve into an entropic soup. There will be no boundary to your inner entropy. And I'm not sure that the audience will follow this. How do I
We can go slowly if you want to unpack it.
If your inner states will mirror the variety of states of the outside world by just reflecting them inside, your structural and dynamical integrity couldn't be maintained because there would be too much variety within you. All that variety of the world outside would be embodied and you wouldn't be able to maintain your shape, your inner structure. You would dissolve into a chaotic entropic soup. So perception has to walk a very fine line between collecting as much information as possible about those thoughts and emotions and endogenous states out there, but in a way that doesn't make you lose your structural integrity. And I think what nature found out was the best way to do that is to translate those thoughts and emotions out there into a kind of dashboard that would give you a sort of at a glance perspective of what is out there without mirroring all that variety, all of those endogenous experiential states. And this dashboard of dials is perception. That's what perception is. That's why seeing red doesn't feel like being angry. That's why feeling peaceful doesn't seem like seeing white. That's why looking at the sun doesn't feel like falling in love. Because if I'm correct, the transpersonal states out there are not perceptual. They are more akin to thoughts, emotions, inner feelings. So why do we see colors and feel flavors when we look at the world instead of thoughts and feelings and emotions? Why? Because there was a huge evolutionary advantage to encode information about those external thoughts and feelings into a dashboard that would allow you to gather that information without dissolving into an entropic soup. I think that's why the qualities of perception are what they are. That's why your experiential inner life looks to me like the cells of your body, your nervous system, your bones, your stomach, and all that. Because that's what we evolved to see. If we could reverse engineer that process, I think we would have a big clue about what is really out there, what the world is as it is in itself. Because what I'm saying is that the world out there, as it is in itself, is thoughts, emotions, feelings, is more akin to that than to colors and flavors. That's just representation. Historically, the world's traditions have made educated, intuitive guesses about that. I mean, to mention an example in the West, Dante, I think doesn't require further introduction. The big Renaissance figure from Italy, he said, there was a memorable passage, he says, he compares the stars to an outpouring of love. So his intuition was, what looks to me like the sun is, from a first person perspective, an outpouring of the feeling of love. So that transpersonal outpouring of love presents itself to me on the screen of perception, which was made to encode that outpouring of love. Otherwise, I would dissolve into that love. It looks like the sun. It looks like a bright star. Other equivalences have been in the world's poetry for a very long time as well. I mean, white is universally associated with calmness, peace. Fire is associated with passion universally. Stones are universally associated with robustness and eternity, timelessness. If you take up a book on symbols, on symbology, there are rich intuitions there. Now, of course, none of that was derived from a strictly scientific method, which is a pity, because a scientific perspective into that translation would be very interesting, would be very valuable. We live in a symbolic world. We are immersed in symbols, and these symbols are not the end of the story. They are not the ultimate meaning. They are pointing at something that exists behind them. So it's something we can study, we can decipher. It's just that nobody's bothering to do that.
So in your view, is there a fundamental difference between there's the conscious states that constitutes the organism that you're made of. You're made of feelings and emotions in these conscious states, and they have an extrinsic appearance like a body, eyes, all these things. But then there seems to be, the causal direction seems to go the other direction in perception, where information is coming in through the senses. You now have, and that's shaping the structure of experience. Is that right? Is there a difference between those two?
The way you worded it is quite dualist. It's coming in through the senses and then it becomes mental. I would say, I'll repeat myself, but I found out that the only way to go about this is to repeat myself, because at some point the coin falls. What we call our sense organs are the appearance of a certain configuration of mind. That configuration of mind is the thing that performs the translation between mental states out there and mental states in here. But that translation is in itself also mental. It is not a non-mental thing doing that translation. So the direction of the arrow of causality is irrelevant. It's a mental process doing a mental translation. And that mental process, it's a process. That mental process looks like our sense organs. That mental process is a configuration of the dissociative boundary, which is mental. It's all mental. These are all mental processes, mental states undergoing dynamic mutation. So there is a continuous dynamic mutation in the configuration of your dissociative boundary. So to say, you know, you grow up, you get old, things change in your body, and that appears to us as our sense organs doing their work. Does it help? Or
so yeah, no, I mean, I think also I wasn't assuming a dualism. I get that the eyes and everything are made of mind as well. I guess it's I guess what I'm pointing to is there's an interesting, you've got the organism that's made of consciousness, and from the outside it has an appearance, and that looks like eyes. If we take vision, like, I think this, okay, yeah, maybe this is the place to hone in on. If there is conscious visual experience, one thing you could say about eyes is that's what it looks like when you look at something that is visual experience. But the other thing you could say about eyes is that is the dissociative boundary mediating this kind of perceptual, there's a flow. When I was talking about a kind of flow of causality, I'm not talking in kind of dualistic terms, but just that there is information being gathered from the world around to the, across the dissociative boundary to the inside of the organism. And I'm kind of wondering if there are two, what your account of what an eye is, I guess, would be in this case.
I think they are the same thing. Look, your eyes don't end at the surface of your body. They go in, not only your eyeballs, but your optical nerve, and it goes into your brain. So there is no boundary there. Even to talk about an eye or two eyes it's a nominal thing. There is no such separation in the reality of the organism. There are no such things as organs. They are just differentiated segments that for convenience, we say, well, we delineate that and we give a word to one part and another word to another part. But the organism is a whole. Your eyes don't stop right behind your skin. They merge into other kinds of tissues that go into your brain. There's a continuous merging. So the dissociative boundary, for exactly the same reason, because I just talked about its appearance now, the dissociative boundary is also nominal. It's something for convenience, it's to explain what I'm talking about. There is a real effect, dissociation, but the boundary itself doesn't end at the surface. It is a process that goes into the organism as well. So that boundary is in itself a translation process, a mental translation process. You can delineate it for convenience. You can say it ends here. Actually, it's not only for convenience in that case. In the case of the dissociative boundary, there is an ontological reality to that in the sense that, I can feel what happens on my finger, but if I touch the monitor, I cannot feel what's happening inside the monitor. So there is an ontic, an ontological aspect to that as well. But what I mean to say is that the boundary doesn't stop at the boundary. It goes in. It's what we call the boundary is just the superficial layer of a mental process. a dissociative mental process. So that translation of outside experiential states into what you feel inside is not taking place only at the boundary. The boundary is a delineation, but it's flowing in and being processed all the way until you experience it. Does it does it answer your question? I didn't get it well.
I think I won't stick with it for too long, but I think I'm yeah, the penny's not dropping on something like if I have conscious experience of you know, as humans we have trichromatic vision, right? We have kind of 3 dimensions primarily in color, of kind of yellow, red, and blue as primary colors and mixes of the 3. And then if you look in the retina, we have these kind of photoreceptors that respond to different wavelengths of light. My first instinct was, well, in your theory, is it that there are mental contents of seeing these three dimensions of color that look from the outside like a retina with these different photoreceptors?
I would call them mental processes.
Like
so there is a mental process that looks like, you know, cones and all those cells in your retina. Go on.
Yeah, I think I'm just harkening back to when we spoke about why why dissociated mental process looks like metabolism. I think there's this mystery that I want to fill in, and maybe I just need to wait centuries for people to do this kind of science to fill this gap. But there's this need to kind of when the arrow flows the other way, and we think of this bottom up dependence of experience on our senses as these physical things interacting with the physical world. Obviously, you know, I've been thinking in that paradigm my entire life, so maybe it's too much to hope that I can flip in a moment. But that's what I'm struggling with, and we don't need to dwell on it much longer if that's not.
No, I'm trying to think. What else can I add? On why life looks like metabolism, I don't think it's complicated. You don't need to wait very long. We talked about it already. It had to look like something. It so happens to be what we call metabolism. But you are looking for a deeper insight. You're looking for the answer to the question, I know how it feels from within. I know how it looks from without. And I grant to you, Bernardo, that it had to look like something. Fine, I understand that. But what is the arrow that connects the two? Why is it exactly that what I feel from within appears to the outside as metabolism? So you're looking for a more in-principle question, right? It had to look like something. I think you accept that. But you're looking for a deeper insight. You're looking for the mechanism of that translation. I would say the mechanism of that translation are your sense organs. It's just that we are so used to mistaking the dashboard for the real thing that it isn't satisfying somehow. We want to dig deeper. Metabolism is the name we give to certain patterns that appear on the screen of perception. In a sense, metabolism is what it is because our perceptual apparatus has evolved the way it evolved. If it had evolved in another direction, the same thing in itself that we call metabolism would look like something totally else, totally different. You understand what I mean? We would be talking about it in totally different terms, yet the thing in itself would be the same. It would still be dissociation. But what dissociation looks like is a function of our sense organs and the way they evolved. I'm not sure I'm helping.
So no, you definitely identified the area that I was interested in. And I think you also used the word insight, and I think actually you pointed to maybe a deeper, the thing that's giving rise to this concern is a feeling of having to sacrifice year after year, in science, you feel like you get these insights as to why nature behaves the way it does. And there's this feeling that in this picture of the world, those insights go from being powerful, explanatory kind of stories we can tell that give us insight into the nature of the world to kind of descriptions of the appearance of the world,
I
you know? So like,
understand. I understand.
if
But
we
this,
take something, if we take like dissociation, right? Like I would say people studying abiogenesis, you know, the beginning of life, there are stories people think in terms of chemistry and thermodynamics and all this physical stuff, right? And I guess what I'm wondering is there an appeal to, should all of the biologists, if they adopted this worldview, are they looking in the wrong place? Should they be looking for a psychological mechanism, you know, or an experiential mechanism that gave birth to life, as opposed to a chemical or a thermodynamic explanation?
I don't think they are looking at the wrong place. I just think they are not looking at all places where there is something to be looked for. It's not the wrong place. It's just not the entire gamut. I understand what you're saying. Look, the dials on the dashboard are correct. They are not wrong. You understand what I mean? What the dials are indicating is true. When you look at the speedometer, it's accurate. It's the correct speed. It's just that a needle on a little needle moving on a round dial is not the movement of the car. It is not what the movement of the car looks like. It's a representation of it, but it is an accurate representation. It conveys valid, important information about what's going on out there. I think it would be crazy to use analytic idealism as an excuse to dismiss perception, to dismiss science. Certainly, I would not do that. And I would violently oppose anybody who tried to do that. The dials are useful. They are the very costly, very painful result of 3.5 billion years of evolution. We would be nuts to dismiss them. But the dials are not the thing in itself. Now, does this make analytic idealism in any sense different than materialism with regards to this? I would say no. If you really understand materialism, you are facing the exact same problem. A materialist who is consistent about his perspective would say, all my experiences are epiphenomenal mental states unfolding inside my skull. They are a representation of something that's out there, the real reality. But that something that's out there is fundamentally inaccessible in any direct way. It's accessible through the representation. So it is accessible, but not immediately accessible. It requires the mediation of epiphenomenal mental states. That's the materialist story. So for the materialist, if you really understand it and you're consistent with it, metabolism, cell biology, all that is also just a representation of something else that we cannot access directly. You're facing the exact same problem. It's actually a worse problem because the analytic idealist can say, what is on the screen of perception is not the thing in itself. It's an accurate representation. The dials are correct. The dials on the dashboard are largely correct. Most of the time they're correct. We can help them with some instrumentation. But what is really out there is not what is on the screen of perception, what is out there in and of itself. But at least the idealist can intuit what it might be like out there. We can talk in terms of an outpouring of love like Dante did. Because we have also endogenous mental states. And although they can be totally different than the endogenous mental states of mind at large, at least we can conceive of it. The materialist cannot even conceive of it. Because for the materialist, what is really out there is not qualitative at all. Therefore, you fundamentally cannot visualize it because any visualization is an arrangement of qualities. So you cannot visualize it. It is impossible to even conceive of what is really out there. So I would say I'm better off than a materialist regarding your point.